Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And wow, what a time we've already had today. It's been so good. And as you can see, I'm going to be talking about being in a posture of worship. And how relevant is that based on what we've already done this morning? It's almost like it was planned. Not planned by me, planned by God, obviously. No, that's so cool. I really feel like God is already moving in this place. So let's keep that up as we go in this today. As I said, today I want to talk to you about being in a posture of worship. How we need to be in a posture of worship, why we need to be in a posture of worship. So, firstly, I just want to start with a question. Not what is worship, but actually, what are you putting first in your life? And the reason why I say that is because worship is putting something first, putting something about everything else. As you can see there, it says in Colossians, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So right there, the Bible calls us to worship because the Bible calls us to put God first in everything we do. Worship is to glorify God. It's to honor him. It's to exalt him. However, that's not always easy to do. As humans, God created us to worship. It's in our blood. It's natural. It's what we should be doing. However, it can sometimes be easy to fall into traps of worshipping other idols. We see it a lot in the Old Testament where the kings go away from God worship, and there's always repercussions from it because of that. But the fact they keep going back to it shows that it's not easy to do being in that posture all the time. And it's actually even the same now today. It said, I've got some on the screen here, some common things that people might worship. That's not God. Money. People worship money. People decide to try to provide for themselves instead of trusting in God. People chase money and, they're still chasing for more and more. Self-love. Now, that might seem a little bit of a weird one because, yes, it's important to look after ourselves and love ourselves. But doing that, does that make you the most important person? Are you then putting yourself above God, above everyone else? There's looking after yourself, then there's being all about me. And then all of a sudden you're worshipping yourself instead. And that could be a hard one to fall into. I've always got to think about pride and humbling myself before God. Social media. Did you know that on average, a young person spends 5 hours a day on social media? I'm not just talking about their phones, I'm talking about specifically on social media itself. And I think just for the amount of time that is almost an act of worship. That is putting that first. What are you doing when you're waking up in the morning? Are you going straight for your phone? Are you going for social media or something else? Or instead, are you going to God? That in itself is almost an act of worship. And then finally, people. This is probably the one you'd expect me to say. Celebrities, sports people, musicians, artists, all of that as well. Remember, probably on my wall growing up, I had posters of footballers, of bands and all that as well, But again, it can get to a point where it's idolizing them. And in fact, without realizing it, you're putting them first. And you're worshipping them maybe without even realizing it. You can always fall into that trap there. So, as I go through what I'm discussing today, have in your mind, am I putting God first in what I am doing? And just quickly on posture as well. Obviously, I titled the slide, Being in the Posture of Worship. Posture is an outward expression of inward reality. In other words, it's our body acting in accordance to how our heart feels. So posture is about the heart. This means that being in a posture of worship is having the heart to worship God. It all starts from within. And then when we do that, it will be reflected in our outward appearance. Now, for example, I'm trying to do this right now. I'm trying to stand in a good posture, exuding confidence or showing that I'm comfortable at the front talking to you, as opposed to slouching, that I look lazy, look like I don't want to be here, feeling scared. That's just an example. Your posture is how you stand, and it reflects how you feel. And we're talking about heart posture in particular. So however your heart is, that gets reflected out with that. Cool. So, why should we worship God? Why should we worship? Firstly, we need to recognize that we need God in our lives. We need to acknowledge that. I know personally, I cannot go a day without acknowledging God or knowing God. And I find it really hard sometimes for people who do that. I don't know how I can how people can get through a day like that. So we need to understand we need him in our lives, and we need to understand we need him in our hearts. We need to put him first. Psalm says, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." What a great verse that is. The speaker who wrote that psalm, says God is the strength of their heart, says God is their portion. Without God, his heart's not strong, his heart is weak. We need God to strengthen us, and that is a brilliant reason to say why we should worship. I'm not going to stop there, but I could stop there and just say that. That is like the number one argument there for why we need to worship God. But there's more than that. When we worship God, we can receive his blessings. Here's the Corinthians verse. God is also able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. So God blesses those who do good works. God blesses those who worship him, who serve him. That means if we do a good work, when we worship him, he is able to bless you abundantly. He is able to give you grace. He is able to give you provision because he's generous to you. But that all comes from putting him first, for worshipping him in the first place. In this verse, it obviously specifically says about serving and being generous. That is a form of worship because he loves a servant heart. He loves those who serve others. God also wants to give us the desires of our heart, again, because he loves us. Psalm 37 says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." So David calls us to delight. Delight comes from the Hebrew word kefetz, meaning to deeply treasure God's spirit and pleasure for his people. So delighting is deeply treasuring God's spirit and pleasure for his people. So by treasuring his presence through worship, by treasuring his presence, by letting him dwell in your heart, you are delighting in God. And when we do that, he's going to grant us the desires of our heart. So those are some really good things, but also in times of battle, we can worship God as well. Worshipping sustains us. Worshipping prepares us for those tough times. By worshipping God in times of struggle, we continue to recognize that we need him in our lives. And it's a way of inviting him into any situation. Like this morning, Silas said about give it to God, don't let your problems come back. Somebody said it, and again, that's what you're doing when you're worshipping God with those things. Now, something actually popped up the other day on my social media, and it was about a study about how worship affects the brain. And it was really interesting. I didn't look too much into it, but I thought I would, let you guys know a little bit about it. Basically, worshipping reducing stress reduces anxiety, amongst other things, and there are scientific studies out there as well that prove that. So go ahead and look that up. But why should we worship? Because worship helps to sustain us. For example, we've got here in Acts, Paul and Silas worshipped in prison. We can see that when they did that, these other prisoners, the prison guard, in turn decided to worship God. They felt his spirit. The prison trembled and the gates opened. And that's all because in a time of need, where they needed to be sustained, and they needed to be they used worship as a weapon. They used worship as a weapon to then sustain and take all the pressures of them and gave it to God. So by deciding to worship him, you are surrendering your situation and you're letting him give you strength instead. When all hope is lost, when you're at your weakest, that's when you worship God, because he can sustain you and prepare. I've already mentioned it already. Worship is a weapon because it prepares us to help us fight in battle. Isaiah 25:1 says, "Lord, you are my God. I will exalt you and praise your name. For in perfect faithfulness, you have done wonderful things, things planned long ago." What a great verse that is. That is a verse of praise. But Isaiah actually used it to prepare. If we go back to chapter 24, Israel was in a dark place. However, this verse is a pivot verse. Going into chapter 25, Isaiah decides to turn from being in a place of struggle to a place of praise and worship. and celebrating victory. It's an encouragement there to show that we can celebrate victory no matter what we do because God prepares us. And we see it happen with the kings as well. King Jehoshaphat here, he went into battle. Before that, he played worship music. He worshipped the Lord. He put God first. And as you can see here, as they began to sing and praise his army, the Lord sent ambush against the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir who were invading Judah, and they were defeated. In short, Jehoshaphat's army did not need to fight at all because they put God first, they prepared through him, and he won the battle for them. And he can do that in your life as well. How cool, how exciting is that? So that is a bit on why we should worship God. So how do we worship? Now, worshipping is more than just praising and singing. It's great that we can come here on a Sunday or play worship songs and put him first that way. There is nothing wrong with that. That is a good thing to do. But worshipping is more than that. It's recognizing God as God. It is simply putting him first in our lives and putting him first through our thoughts. And a great way we can do this is by giving him thanks. When you pray, I think it's always important, before you go into whatever else you want to say, it's always important to give thanks to God. You've got the TSP, thanks, sorry, please. Nice little way of praying there. But you always start with thanks. There's always something to be thankful for. In Psalm 23, David says, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of God. His love endures forever. And give thanks to the Lord of Lords. His love endures forever. Give thanks is in there 3 times. That's how important it is. And even if you're low, even if you've had a really bad day, you don't know what to give thanks for, you can give thanks to God for his love because it endures forever. His love is always going to be there. So no matter your circumstances, no matter what you're in, what you're going through, there's always something to worship by giving thanks to God for his love. Another way to worship is to, sounds really simple, but make time for God because he wants to spend time with you. And when you spend time with him, don't hold back. Go all in. Don't do it half-heartedly. Psalm 96 there, verse 9, calls us to worship him in a way of fearing God. He says to worship the Lord in splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. It calls us to worship in a way of fearing where we tremble before God. It's not just half-hearted. You're putting yourself fully in for it. It encourages us to give our all to God in worship so we can draw near to him by recognizing his holiness and by recognizing his power. And again, this verse is also about surrendering yourself and humbling yourself before God, recognizing and acknowledging again that you cannot do life on your own, that you need him. Sorry, my laptop is in. Let me scroll down, so just bear with me a moment. The wonders of technology. Here we go. Is it going to work? If not, I'll go without my notes and see how we get on. Okay, we're just going to continue. We're going to see how it goes. So, worshipping is also important to do with singing and praising as well, and lifting of hands and so on. The Bible does also mention that it is still a powerful way. I've just tried to get the point across, it's not the only way. But it says here in Timothy, therefore, I want men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands and without anger or disputing. So Paul actually calls us to still lift up hands. And when you do that, you're physically surrendering to God. It's a way of worship in another way. It's your action. It's coming from your posture. I feel like maybe in church, if you feel like doing something like that, it's because your heart's there already and you want to show worshiping God. Now, the funny thing is, when you lift up your hands, it's like you're surrendering everything. You're saying, here I am. You're surrendering. But also, it's like a child reaching up to their parent. It's like you're reaching to your father and say, Father, I want to be closer to you. And similarly, bowing before the Lord offers, is again, similar traits for similar things. And in fact, it's so powerful that even kings bow before the Lord. May all kings bow down to him and all nations serve him. Even kings in the Old Testament, New Testament, who have all this power, who have all this money, who have everything, they still recognize that they need to worship him, and they did that by bowing down before him. So you can also worship God through your actions, as well as through your what you sing and what you say as well. And I think it's no coincidence so far that I've talked a lot about Psalms. I've given so many bits from Psalms. And that's because Psalms is a book of song, it's a book of praise. The Greek translation of Psalms actually translates to that. It would be in my notes if I had it up. And that's why it's so important. And I feel like it's not a coincidence that Psalms is one of the longest books and has the most verses, because it shows how powerful praise is. It shows how powerful worshipping God is. So if you're ever struggling about how to worship, just open Psalms and read that. That's a great place to start. So what about posture? I've talked a lot about worshipping, but how does our posture come into it? How does our heart come into it? As you can see there, Jesus calls us to worship in spirit and to worship in truth. Now, worshipping in truth is being in line with God's word, but it's worshipping in spirit that I really want to focus on. Worshipping in spirit is about worshipping from your heart. That's what Jesus wants us to do. And he actually calls out those who don't do that. In Matthew, he called out, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from us. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You see how he's saying, it doesn't matter what you say from your lips. You've still got to worship him in your heart. You've still got to have a good posture. Your heart posture still has to be there. Now, a funny thing about posture is that it's not something you're going to get right all the time. It's always going to be changing, but it comes down to habits. Think about a ballet dancer in training. They want to have that good posture when they're dancing, right? But that takes time, that takes practice, that takes effort, that takes commitment. And that's the same with us. It's fine coming on a Sunday and having a good heart posture, but how are you continuing that throughout the week? How are you making it an everyday thing? How are you making it a lifestyle? One way to do that is by making your heart a temple, making your heart a cathedral so you can invite God into a place to dwell there. In fact, it says in Corinthians, do you not know that your bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not on your own. Your body is already a temple, so treat it like a temple. Treat it like a place where God can come in and dwell in your heart. And that's the start of having a good posture, a good worshipful posture. As I said, it's an everyday thing. It's not just doing it on a Sunday. It's not just doing it so it's points in the week. It's an everyday thing. It's a lifestyle. Romans, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. That verse sums it all up. Paul already says it's your true and proper worship. And all you've got to do, well, I say all you've got to do, harder than you think, is giving your body as a living sacrifice. And that means every day. That means whatever you do, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're doing, give it to God. You're giving your body to God to serve him. And in fact, Jesus also tells us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and so on and so on. But he says to love you with all your heart. Again, that's what having a good heart posture is. It's about loving God with all your heart and about giving yourself every day, giving your body, sacrificing it to God. So would the worship team like to come up? Before we finish, I asked that question at the beginning. What are you putting first in your life? What are you Are you putting God first in your life? Is God your priority? Are other things your priority? Is there something that's maybe been highlighted that you didn't realize you put so much thought into, and actually maybe you're worshipping that instead? Maybe that's all okay, but maybe your heart isn't in the right place. Maybe you need to recommit that to God as well. So if we can all stand, I'm just going to pray. And then we're going to go into a really powerful song talking about what worship really is about.